My son stood in my kitchen, the kitchen I had helped renovate 2 summers ago, the one where I'd spent every Sunday morning making breakfast for his family, and looked at me the way you'd look at a stranger who had wandered into the wrong house. "Dad," he said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "Vanessa and I have talked about this. The birthday dinner is going to be small, intimate, just her family." I held my coffee mug with both hands. "Your father's 65th birthday." "I know, but her parents are flying in from Calgary and her sisters, and honestly, it's just going to be easier if—" "Easier," I repeated. He didn't flinch. That's what I keep coming back to. He didn't flinch at all. Let me tell you something about myself before I go any further. I am not a man who asks for much. 31 years working as a land surveyor in Northern Ontario will either make you comfortable with silence, or it'll break you. And I came out the other side mostly intact. My name is Douglas. I'm 65 years old. I was married to my wife for 22 years before she passed from ovarian cancer, and I raised my son, my only child, largely on my own after that. I coached his hockey team. I drove 4 hours each way to watch him graduate from Lakehead University. When he got a job offer in Sudbury and couldn't afford first and last on a decent apartment, I gave him the money without a second thought. $12,000. I told him not to worry about paying it back. He didn't. That was 9 years ago. I thought it was just how things worked between a father and his son. You give because you love them. You don't keep score. I should have kept score. When he married Vanessa 4 years ago, I tried. God knows I tried. She was not a warm woman, but I told myself that not everyone wears their feelings on the outside. Her family was from money, old Alberta oil money, and I think she always looked at me and saw a retired civil servant from a small town who wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation. I noticed how she changed the subject when I talked about my work. I noticed how she'd laugh a little too quickly at things her mother said that weren't funny. But my son loved her, and I loved my son, so I kept quiet and I kept showing up. 2 years ago, everything shifted. My son called to say they'd found a house, a real house, not a condo, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, backing onto a ravine. He sent me photos. It was beautiful. He also sent me the price tag, $840,000. He didn't ask me outright. He never did. What he did was explain the situation in careful detail, his mortgage pre-approval, the gap between what they had saved and what they needed for the down payment, the way the market was moving. He painted the picture, and then he waited. I sold the cabin. My father had built that cabin on Lake Temagami with his own hands in 1971. I had spent every summer of my childhood there. I had scattered my wife's ashes off that dock. It sold for $215,000, and I transferred $160,000 of it to my son's account without conditions. I kept the rest for myself, my retirement, my cushion, my plan to maybe travel a little before my knees gave out completely. He bought the house. They moved in that October. I helped them move. I borrowed a pickup truck from my neighbor and drove it loaded with boxes while my son directed traffic and Vanessa supervised from the front porch with a coffee she had not offered to share. 6 months later, they asked if I'd like to stay for a while. My condo lease was up, and the timing seemed to make sense. I thought it was an olive branch. I thought it meant we were becoming something closer. I moved in at the beginning of January. By April, I understood my actual role in that house. I cooked dinner 4 nights a week. I watched the kids. They had a 3-year-old and a newborn by then. On the evenings my son and Vanessa went out, I shoveled the driveway during the ice storms because my son's back wasn't great. I paid $900 a month in rent for a basement room that still smelled like new drywall. I didn't complain. I told myself this was what family looked like up close. A little transactional, a little unglamorous, but real. I was useful. I mattered. Then came my birthday. The conversation in the kitchen happened on a Tuesday evening in late September. I had just gotten home from a walk. My son was waiting for me, and I could tell from the way he was standing, slightly turned away, arms crossed, that he had rehearsed this. He told me the dinner was for Vanessa's family. He told me it was going to be at a restaurant in the city, and they only had a reservation for 10. He told me he hoped I understood. "I'd like to come to my own birthday dinner," I said. "Dad, it's a statement, not a request." He looked at the floor. Vanessa's parents are already uncomfortable with the living situation. Having you there would just It would make things complicated. What living situation? You know. You being here. He said it the way you'd describe a mild inconvenience, a leaky faucet, a draft under the door. I asked him to clarify what he meant by complicated. What came out over the next 10 minutes was this. Vanessa's parents believed, and Vanessa had apparently not corrected them, that I was living in the basement because I had nowhere else to go, that I was, in their words, a dependent. My son had allowed this impression to form because it was easier than explaining the truth, which was that I had contributed $160,000 to the roof currently over their heads. I said very quietly that I needed some air. I went downstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I've thought about it a lot since. It wasn't rage. It was something colder than rage. It was the specific grief of realizing that a person you built your whole life around has been quietly, consistently ashamed of you, and that you were the last one to know. I did not sleep well that night, or the night after. What I did instead was think. I have a childhood friend named Conrad who became a family lawyer in Ottawa. We've known each other since we were 9 years old, and he has the rare quality of being completely honest with me, even when what he has to say is not what I want to hear. I called him on the Thursday after the kitchen conversation, early in the morning before he got into the office. I told him everything. The cabin, the $160,000, the basement room, the birthday dinner, the word dependent. Conrad listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause, and then he said, "Douglas, tell me, did you ever get anything in writing? A promissory note? A gift letter? Anything?" I hadn't. Of course I hadn't. He was my son. Conrad made a sound I can only describe as the sound a person makes when they're choosing not to say something. Then he said, "Okay, here's what I want you to do." What Conrad explained to me that morning, calmly, carefully, in the way that only a person who has seen this exact situation 50 times before can explain it, was that without documentation, my contribution to the house existed in a legal gray area. In Ontario, a gift is a gift. I couldn't claim it back. What I could do was establish a paper trail going forward, and there were a few other things worth looking into regarding the rental arrangement. He also told me to stop paying rent into my son's account and start keeping those payments in a separate account with a clear record. "Just document everything from here," he said. "And Douglas, do not move anything, sell anything, or sign anything until we talk again." I asked him why. He said, "Because I have a feeling things are about to change." He was right, though not in the way I expected. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, Vanessa sat down across from me at the kitchen table. My son was not home. She had clearly planned this. She told me that she and my son had been thinking, and they felt it would be best if I started looking for my own place again. She said it warmly, with the practiced warmth of someone who has learned that delivering bad news with a smile makes them feel better about themselves. She mentioned something about needing the space for a home office. She mentioned that I'd have more independence. She mentioned a government rental assistance program for seniors. She had actually looked this up and told me I might qualify. I am 65 years old. I am not infirm. I am not impoverished. I have a pension from the province of Ontario and an RRSP that I have been contributing to for 30 years. The rental assistance program she referenced is for low-income seniors in genuine housing need. I looked at her across the table for a moment. Then I said, "That's very thoughtful of you. I'll look into my options." She smiled and went upstairs. I called Conrad before she reached the second-floor landing. Here is what I did not know until Conrad started making calls on my behalf. My son had, approximately 3 months prior, quietly had me added to the house's property title, not as a co-owner with any meaningful share. As a formality, he'd told the lawyer at the time, something about estate planning. I had signed a document he'd put in front of me during a family dinner, in a stack of other papers he said were routine. I had trusted him. What that meant, Conrad explained, was that I was technically on title. And what that meant was that removing me and doing anything significant with the property required my signature. My son had not realized this was still the case, or perhaps he had assumed I would sign whatever he needed without asking questions, the same way I always had. Conrad told me I was under no obligation to sign anything at all. The birthday dinner happened on a Thursday evening. I know because I was alone in the basement when I heard them all leaving, the click of heels on the hardwood, Vanessa's mother's voice carrying down from the front hallway, the front door closing, the car pulling out of the driveway. I sat there for a little while. I'll admit that. Then I got up, put on my coat, and drove to a diner on the highway about 20 minutes north of the city. I ordered the beef dip and a slice of coconut cream pie, and I ate alone at a window table and watched the trucks go by in the dark, and I thought about my father's cabin and the way the water looked at 6 in the morning when the mist was still sitting on it. I thought about my wife. I thought about what she would have said to me. She would have said, "Doug, stop feeling sorry for yourself and figure out what you actually want." So I did. What I wanted was simple. I wanted to be treated like a person who had earned his place at the table. Any table, rather than a problem to be managed. I wanted my son to look at me the way he used to look at me. Before Vanessa, before the house, before I became useful, and then inconvenient. I wanted the cabin back, and I couldn't have that, so what I wanted instead was to stop subsidizing people who were ashamed of me. I also, if I'm honest, wanted them to understand what they had done, not in a dramatic way, just clearly. I wanted there to be a moment when it was impossible to pretend otherwise. Conrad gave me that moment. It started with a letter. Conrad sent it to my son's address on a Monday morning, which meant my son opened it that afternoon at the kitchen table, apparently while Vanessa was standing behind him, reading over his shoulder. He told me this later, much later, in a different tone of voice than any he'd used with me in years. The letter outlined, in precise legal language, the following: my position on the property title, the nature of my financial contribution to the purchase of the home, the informal rental arrangement, and the payments I had been making, and my intent to clarify the terms of my ongoing involvement with the property before signing any future documents or making any decisions about my living situation. It did not threaten. It did not accuse. It simply stated facts that, taken together, painted a picture my son had apparently never stopped to look at from the outside. Conrad told me later that the letter was received with some alarm. I imagine it was. What happened next happened quickly. My son called me that same evening. I was at a hotel. I had quietly booked myself 2 nights at a place in Huntsville just to get some breathing room, and I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about what my wife would say, and I picked up. He asked me what was going on. I told him I thought we should talk in person. He agreed. We met 2 days later at a Tim Hortons near the highway, which felt appropriately Canadian and also appropriately undramatic. I didn't want drama. I wanted a conversation. I told him everything I had been carrying for the past 2 years. The cabin. What it had meant to me, the Sunday dinners and the shoveled driveway and the $900 a month. The birthday. The word dependent. What Vanessa had said about the rental assistance program. I told him I loved him, and that loving someone does not mean allowing them to make you invisible. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know she said that to you." Which part? He didn't answer right away. Any of it. I don't know how much of that was true. I've decided it doesn't really matter. Here is what I know matters. I moved out of that basement in October, on my own timeline, into a very nice 2-bedroom apartment in a building near Barrie with a small balcony and a view of the water. I used some of the money I'd kept from the cabin sale to furnish it properly. I bought myself a real armchair, the kind with the ottoman and the reading lamp, the kind I'd always meant to get. Conrad negotiated a formal acknowledgement of my financial contribution, not repayment, which wasn't legally available to me, but a written record that my son and Vanessa both signed, acknowledging that the $160,000 had been a contribution to the purchase of the family home, and that I had certain interests as a title holder. We agreed I would sign off my portion of the title in exchange for a structured arrangement that gave me something concrete in return. I won't share the specific details. They are private. But they are documented. Everything now is documented. My son calls more than he used to. We have lunch sometimes. It is awkward in the way that things are awkward when trust has been broken and is being slowly, carefully rebuilt. Not restored, not yet, maybe not ever fully, but rebuilt into something new and more honest than what was there before. Vanessa and I are civil. I do not expect more than that, and I've stopped wanting it. I think about that drive back from Tim Hortons sometimes. Just me and my truck on the 400, the October sky, that specific shade of pale gray. That means winter is serious about arriving. I had a thermos of coffee on the passenger seat, and the radio was playing something I didn't recognize. I felt tired. I felt sad. I also felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years that I can only describe as level, like the ground under my feet was solid again. I am not a man who believes everything happens for a reason. I've lived long enough to know that a lot of things happen for no reason at all, and your job is just to decide what to do next. What I decided is this. The people in your life should make you feel like you are worth something, not because of what you provide, not because of what you've given them or what you might still give, but because you are a person and you have been here a long time and you have earned the right to take up space at any table you walk into. I taught my son to tie his skates on a frozen parking lot on a Saturday morning when it was -20 and neither of us wanted to be outside. I taught him to drive in an empty Canadian Tire parking lot on a Sunday in March. I taught him that you call your father back the same day. He forgot that last one for a while. He seems to be remembering it now. I ordered a steak that night, alone in my hotel room in Huntsville, called down for room service like it was a special occasion, because it was. Because I had decided it was. I ate it watching the news, and then I slept better than I had in months. And in the morning, I drove home through the fall colors, and I thought about what to do next with whatever time I have left. I'm thinking about a trip. Maybe the East Coast. I've never seen Cape Breton in the fall, and I hear it's something. We teach people how to treat us. That's the thing I wish someone had told me 30 years ago. It's not their fault for pushing. It's that we never showed them where the wall was. I found mine. I'm keeping it. That's enough. That's more than enough. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, looking at it from different angles, trying to decide what it actually means. What I keep landing on is this. None of what happened was sudden, not the hurt, not the distance, not the moment my son stood in that kitchen and told me my presence at my own birthday dinner would make things complicated. These things don't arrive out of nowhere. They build slowly, one small concession at a time, one unsigned boundary at a time, until one day you look up and realize you have quietly arranged your entire life around people who never once arranged theirs around you. That's not anyone's fault in the dramatic sense. It's just what happens when you don't show people where you end and where they begin. I gave my son everything I knew how to give. The cabin money, the Sunday dinners, the shoveled driveway at 6 in the morning, I gave because I thought that was what love looked like. Unconditional, no receipts, no conditions. And maybe that's true, in some pure version of the word. But I've learned that generosity without honesty isn't kindness. It's just a slow way of making yourself disappear. What Comrade did, that letter, those careful legal facts laid out in plain language, wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't about punishing my son or Vanessa or making anyone suffer. It was about making the invisible visible, about saying, here is what actually happened, written down so that no one can pretend otherwise. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to let the story be rewritten, and that took intelligence. Not cleverness, not strategy, but the honest kind of intelligence that asks, what is actually true here, and what do I need to do about it? I had to stop telling myself the comfortable version and look at the real one. That's harder than it sounds when you love someone. It also took a kind of endurance I didn't know I had. There were nights in that basement room where I genuinely wasn't sure I had the strength to do anything other than keep my head down and accept what had become of things. The birthday dinner broke something open in me, but what came through that opening wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. And clarity, I found, is worth almost any price. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes this story, who has ever made themselves smaller to keep the peace, who has ever written a check and swallowed their dignity along with it, is that there is nothing noble about disappearing. Being good to people does not require being invisible to yourself. You can love someone completely and still refuse to be treated as a footnote in their life. I found my wall. I held it. And then I drove north through the October colors and ate a decent steak alone in a hotel room and felt, for the first time in years, like myself. That's the whole lesson. It fits on one line, but it takes a lifetime to actually learn it. The way you allow people to treat you is the way they will treat you until you decide otherwise. I decided otherwise. It wasn't too late. It never is.